Hello, everybody. Good morning if you're joining in from Canada, and a very good evening to our cohort and partners joining from India. We are pleased to welcome you all to the launch day of Startup Bridge Canada 2021. We have a power packed day lined up for you, and this is the start of a 6 weeks to follow, where you will interact with our Canadian partners and mentors. So, without any further ado, I'd like to play our provincial partner videos and to be followed by welcome remarks by my colleague Ajay Ramasubramaniam.
Is Canada's westernmost province, stretching from the Rocky Mountains to the Pacific Ocean. BC British Columbia is Canada's westernmost province, stretching from the Rocky Mountains to the Pacific Ocean. BC is recognized globally as a top business destination. We're a hub for innovation and creativity. Our world-leading post-secondary institutions attract students from all around the world, producing a diverse and highly skilled workforce to drive our economy and your success. And as we rapidly approach our goal of 100% high-speed connectivity, we're helping BC companies, using advanced technologies, establish themselves as global pioneers in information communications technology and wireless, life sciences, film, television, and visual effects, digital media and interactive, financial technology, aerospace, marine technology, and sustainable natural resource development that engages Indigenous communities as partners, and in agri-food and seafood products that meet the highest quality standards. We benefit directly from strong trading relationships across the globe, acting as a market gateway between the Asia-Pacific region and North America. Our state-of-the-art deep-sea ports are ice-free year-round and up to nearly 2.5 shipping days closer to Asian ports than other West Coast locations. Together with our extensive modern rail and highway system, British Columbia's Northern Corridor provides the easiest access between the world's two biggest economies. And Vancouver International Airport, consistently rated one of North America's best, makes traveling and business easy. BC's economy is powered by 98% clean, renewable electricity, and BC companies are world-class innovators in clean technology for energy and transportation. Our commitment to the environment and our planet is an important part of who we are. We're one of the world's most sought-after tourism destinations, with world-class cities, spectacular natural wonders, and the widest range of lifestyle opportunities. These and so many other reasons give British Columbia a natural advantage. Learn more about BC at britishcolumbia.ca.
Ontario and India have always shared a strong, fruitful relationship based on a storied history of trade and investment. Our partnership is further solidified by a deep cultural and personal connection that goes far beyond our borders. In fact, Ontario has the largest Indian community in all of Canada. There are nearly 900,000 people of Indian descent living in the province, and in 2019, over 52,000 Indian students studied at Ontario post-secondary institutions. With complementary economies and common goals, there has never been a better time for Ontario and India to collaborate in business. In 2019, two-way trade between Ontario and India totaled $3.4 billion. And there are over 60 Indian companies operating in the province, including ICICI Bank, Wipro, and Tata. Likewise, there are over 100 Ontario companies with a presence in India, such as OpenText, McCain Foods, and Sun Life Financial. In fact, Ontario-based investors have been at the forefront of infrastructure development in India, contributing over $15 billion to projects over the last 3 years. To see for yourself, just look up the province's own Form Glass Products Limited designed the ceiling in the second terminal of Mumbai's Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj International Airport. And Ontario-based Brookfield owns the largest privately held road network in India. With partnerships such as NASSCOM and several MOUs currently in effect, Ontario and India will continue to boost innovation, grow our respective economies, and reimagine our shared future.
Our city is unique. It buzzes with creativity. It beats to the rhythm of its own success. And we're here to make sure our metropolis, with its rich history and promising future, shines on the global stage. We are Montreal International, the investment promotion agency for Greater Montreal. We hold the keys to this region with infinite potential, opening every door to investors, entrepreneurs, organizations, professionals, and students around the world. With the strength of our network, we're here to support you in building connections, forging collaborations, and bringing your projects to life. We're here to show you all the city has to offer. From aerospace, VFX, and artificial intelligence, to video games, life sciences, and health technologies, we know our metropolis by heart, its hidden gems, its needs, and its endless possibilities. Our mission is to share with you the assets that define the region's identity, its cosmopolitan energy, its safe and open culture, its strong purchasing power, and above all, its quality of life that's known around the world. So welcome home to Montreal.
And leaders. We're resilient, resourceful.
Hi everyone. I'll just take this over at this moment. I think whenever we talk of technology and technology related events, I think technology has to play some kind of a spoil sport at some point in time. So I think we're having a glitch with the video, the last video that we were playing of our partners from province of Alberta. As soon as that is resolved, we'll play the video again. My name is Ajay Ramasubramaniam. I'm co-founder and CEO of Startup Rizzo. Welcome to everyone who's present here from our partners in Canada. I see Mr. Stuart Beck. It's way early in West Coast in Canada, but thank you so much for joining in. And also to the cohort, which is essentially the core of this program. I'll just quickly play a very short slide, just one slide, which gives an overview of who we have with us in the room. I've been in the Canada-India corridor for a few years, and we have looked at good number of companies that have looked at taking their businesses to North America, soft landing in Canada. But what we have here in this cohort of Startup Bridge Canada is phenomenal, for the lack of any other words. 35 very solid companies that we have put together from an application pool of 276 companies that applied through a process. In terms of diversity, we have them all from different industries, but all the more important reasons to look at this cohort very closely is the number of venture-backed companies, companies which are doing very well in terms of their gross revenues. In terms of team sizes, more than one-third of the companies that are a part of the cohort have more than 40 team members on an average, 3 companies with more than 100 team members. So we are looking at fairly sizable companies here, which are looking at truly becoming global, taking their businesses from India to North America, and looking at making Canada home when it comes to their North American business operations. Even in terms of the different domains from which we have companies, a lot of companies that fall in the broader bucket of artificial intelligence and machine learning, enterprise Internet of Things, software as services companies. So we have a fairly robust mix of companies, some strong founders who have been at it for a while and built some good businesses over here in India, and are probably ready to take their companies global. So in that way, we are fairly happy with the kind of mix that we have put together. Also, on the other hand, we have some really strong partners that we have identified on the Canadian side who are going to be engaging with the cohort over the next 6 weeks. As my colleague Mithali mentioned right at the outset, we have a fairly power-packed day today. And without taking any further time, I would like to invite on stage His Excellency Ajay Bisaria, the High Commissioner of India to Canada from Ottawa, to make the opening remarks, the welcome remarks, and talk about the Canada-India relations when it comes to the technology corridor. Over to you, sir.
Namaskar, and very good morning and good evening to folks in India. Good to see Mr. Ajay Ramasubramaniam on my screen, and I also see my old friend Stuart Beck. So it's great to see all of you, and wonderful, and welcome to this event. It's really always exciting to talk about startups on any occasion, but I think this is very special. This is very focused. What I thought I'd do is just give you a general overview of what's happening in India before coming to the India-Canada corridor, and then looking at some of the startup opportunities we are seeing from this vantage point in Ottawa. We have on the public health crisis a good story to tell from India today. We have both lower numbers, and fortunately, whether by miracle or by design, we are on a number in terms of percentage of morbidity and mortality, both less than 1%. So we are at a stage of absolute numbers being about 10 million COVID cases, but the percentage numbers are lower. They're half of what they are in Canada and much less than what they are in the US. Also, I think if 2020 was the year of the vaccine, of the virus, 2021 is the year of the vaccine. And India is leading the charge on the vaccine. The rollout has been one of the fastest in the world in India. And there's a global outreach with vaccine. Very recently, Prime Minister Trudeau spoke to Prime Minister Modi, and we are delighted that vaccines have been green lighted for Canada as well, and we should hopefully soon have India-made vaccines going into the arms of Canadians. So that's one strong startup story, the vaccine story. But overall, I think now India is open for business because the coronavirus pandemic is at an ebb. The air bubbles are allowing for mobility. And in fact, we are issuing business visas. So people can travel for business to India, and India is open for business. With Canada, the story has been very positive. We have more flights now per week than we ever had pre-pandemic. We have about 10 flights a week going into India and all full. So a lot of interest in travel to India and doing business with India. The economic crisis, again, the story is hopeful. We all know 2020 was a year of crisis, of contraction, but 2021, we are hoping for the Indian economy will be a year of V-shaped recovery. We already have very positive projections from the IMF of 11.5% in 2021 in terms of growth, and to be followed through in 2022 by more growth. So India hopes to be a global economic engine for the recovery. And so the recovery story, again, is a positive one. When we look at the India-Canada corridor, we are looking at a strategic partnership that we established in 2015 when Prime Minister Modi came to Canada. And the headline of that partnership has been the economic corridor that has opened up and is flowing in terms of both capital and technology from Canada to India, and in terms of the innovation and human capital coming in from India towards Canada. So the headline of this story has, of course, been the investment coming in by the investment firms and pension funds. It used to be $5 billion in 2014. It is over $60 billion today. And Canada has voted with its feet in the trust and belief in the Indian economy. And that has been a very positive story of the last few years. This investment has gone where India needs it to fuel its growth and fuel its ambition of being a $5 trillion economy by 2025 and a $10 trillion economy perhaps in the next decade. But this investment has gone into infrastructure, logistics, real estate, and energy. But what we are hoping, and the conversations we have with the pension funds, is how to get this investment attracted to the startup space. And we are finding ways and means of doing that into the startup space already. CDPQ, which is based in Montreal, is actively looking at those ideas. So these companies, these pension funds, which have been around for a decade in India, are looking at taking more risks with startups. So this has been a very positive part of the story. We're talking of overall engagement today of $100 billion plus, if you count trade, investment, trade and services. The IT sector in Canada has done, Indian IT majors in Canada have done very well. So 600 Canadian companies in India, about 1,000 which are actively doing business, more than 100 Indian companies active in Canada in the IT sector, but also pharmaceuticals. And we even having conversations about vaccines, but in a number of different spaces. So I think we have a very positive backdrop for talking about startups in the India-Canada corridor. The startup story in India, you're very familiar with. You've talked about it. That is, India is today the third largest ecosystem for startups in the world and growing. For me, the figure that really jumps out is that we had a 15% growth in incubators and accelerators in these years, and that we have produced 21 unicorns, estimated about 50,000 startups. So the startup story in India is the story which we are talking about in Canada for a while, and it is something being appreciated quite deeply. The other number we are talking about is that in terms of investment, the investment in India at the peak of the pandemic, April to September, was showing was up close to $40 billion and showing a 15% growth over the previous year. So in the overall investment climate in Canada is seen to be very positive. And particularly in the startup space, we are seeing some very positive developments and conversations. I was going to mention some of the other figures, but before that, one strong element in India-Canada, in the India-Canada relationship is of the Indo-Canadian community. We have a natural champion for Indian companies, Indian startups in the Indo-Canadian community of 1.6 million and growing. And this community is in leadership positions in politics, in business, in and also in science, technology, in universities. So we are seeing a natural kind of space to promote the sort of ecosystem we need for a corridor of startups. And again, add to that the 230,000 Indian students. We are the largest source country for students and for immigrants in Canada. And these become natural startup growers. So the students, we've been talking to some of these very, very entrepreneurial students who want to start on business the moment they arrive in Canada and they're doing their first year studies. They want to start doing something. So we are not advising them to do that. That might make them Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg. But what we are advising them to do is look at these options. And for Canada's point of view, these are the low-hanging fruit. These students often become the permanent residents and later the entrepreneurs. So that, I think, is also very special. I think when we look at this sector, we are looking at the numbers which are kind of arguing the case in a very, very positive way. We are looking at startups which at about 30, and the predictions are about the startup ecosystem going, I was reading in a recent report, to about 50 unicorns by 2022. So we are talking of 50 unicorns, which means we are getting into the space of soonicorns. And there could be about several companies at the moment incubating and accelerating, and that could become the unicorns of 2022, which means they become the natural kind of receptacles for funds. When we talk to the pension funds, they are keen on getting involved in this space or the late stage to be unicorns, which are going into the listing stage, and both in terms of private equity and later investment. The unicorns become a huge area for investments. The good news in 2021 has been that the first unicorn to come out of India has a Canadian connection. So Digit Insurance, which is now valued at $1.9 billion already, is something promoted by Fairfax. And Fairfax, as you know, is championed by an Indo-Canadian, Prem Vatsa, who has been championing the cause of technology and greater exchanges in the India-Canada technology corridor. And this Fairfax itself has voted with its feet, putting in more than $3 billion in India over these last few years, and planning to put a lot more. But the point is that there is a sudden attention and focus on startups, not just the unicorns. It's on all startups. The super technology super clusters in Canada have been inviting startups from India. And there is a general recognition of the kind of entrepreneurial abilities and the technology that Indian companies can bring to the table. So let me stop right there and wish you a very, very positive and constructive conversation. Thank you. I think you're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry. So that was really a very inspiring and insightful talk by His Excellence Ajay Bisaria to set the tone for the day and the upcoming weeks. Before I call Mr. Stuart Beck, may I request my colleagues to please play the video on Alberta that we missed playing a few minutes back, please.
We're Albertan. We work smart, play hard, and live large. We're entrepreneurs, innovators, and leaders. We're resilient, resourceful, and compassionate. We constantly challenge ourselves to do more, dream bigger, and try harder. You don't need to tell us what to do. We work smart, just tell us what needs to be hard, and we get things done. We're entrepreneurs, innovators, and leaders. We're resilient, resourceful, fields, and compassionate, rushing rivers, and breathtaking mountains. We constantly challenge ourselves to do more, dream bigger, and try and creating them out of nothing. You don't need to tell us what to do. We work smart, just tell us what needs to be hard, and we get things done. We like to win. We're entrepreneurs, and we do innovators and leaders. We're resilient, resourceful, fields, and rushing rivers, country music, and pick up trucks. We constantly challenge ourselves to do more, dream bigger, and try and create them out of nothing. Higher education and higher numbers, just tell us what needs to be hard. Symphonies, we skyscrapers done. Nanotechnology and natural resources. And leaders. We're resilient, weapons, and rushing country music, pick up trucks. We respect diversity, we constantly challenge ourselves to do more, encourage innovation, try and create them. We've been known to fight. Higher education and higher numbers, tell us what needs to be hard. Symphonies, we skyscrapers done. Nanotechnology and natural resources. Uniform and a handshake is our promise. We do more today because we're weapons. That's how we like it. Country music, pick up trucks. We respect diversity, embrace opportunities, encourage innovation, try and create them. We've been known to fight. Higher education and higher numbers, tell us what needs to be hard. Symphonies.
I think we had a little problem with that video. I'd now like to call upon and invite my Mr. Stuart Beck, President and CEO, Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada. Stuart is a good friend of India, having earlier been the High Commissioner of Canada to India, based out of New Delhi. We are glad to have Stuart present Canada's research and innovation-driven economy. Stuart, over to you.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Can you hear me? Okay, very good. And it's wonderful to see High Commissioner Bisaria. It's been a little while since we've all been in lockdown here in Canada, so hopefully we'll be able to see each other soon. And if I can just make a couple of comments about Alberta, it's unfortunate about the video, but Alberta, has traditionally been a resource-based economy, and they're making huge investments today in changing that economy into one that's more diversified and includes a really vibrant and active startup community and technology community. And so just recently, there's some really interesting announcements that have been made coming out of Alberta. It's one of those things where you have to do that. You've been relying on resources for so long in your history that making those changes is not easy, but they're doing it quite quickly and quite effectively. I'm also quite proud to hear High Commissioner Bisaria talk about a few things that's been happening in the Canada-India corridor. I left India in 2014, but when I arrived in 2010, we only issued 3,000 student permits a year for students to come to Canada, and now we must be over 35,000 student permits, and it really is makes me quite proud to see India as being the #1 student population now in Canada, overtaking the Chinese. But this will be part of my talk and one of the important elements of the tech ecosystem in Canada. The other thing I'm quite proud of is during my time in India, we worked quite hard with our Indian friends in Ryerson University to set up the startup zone of the Bombay Stock Exchange. And this is where I first met Ajay and Mitali, and the work that we did at the High Commission in the Consulate General in Bombay. And it was really bringing a Canadian model of incubator accelerator into India. And I'd like to say we were at the very front end of that whole wave, and partly because of the experience that we've been having in Canada, and we saw the same sort of model working well in India. But I'm going to try and take a little different approach today on this conversation. You're going to get lots of numbers from the various speakers, so I see it coming up behind me. What I'd like to talk about a little bit is, I was 32 years in the Canadian Foreign Service, and all those as a trade commissioner, which is basically a job to assist Canadian business in their marketing and export activities. I was lucky enough to open Canada's trade office in Silicon Valley in the mid-'80s. So I can really talk from a historic perspective on where the Canadian technology sector has gone. And my experience working with Canadian companies in the Valley in the mid-'80s, when the Valley itself was about hardware and silicon, Canadian companies coming into that market didn't really understand from a hardware perspective, how to sell into a market that's as difficult as it is into the Valley. But the other thing we didn't understand is we didn't understand scale. Canada is a very small market, as you know. Even today, it's 37 million people spread across 3,000 miles. And we were historically not risk takers. And that's a vestige, much like India, of the British colonial attitude toward banking and failure. So Canadians weren't out there doing that type of, getting out and trying to make things happen like you see today. We did have technology companies, and of course, we were seen as global leaders of the telecommunications area. Nortel, of course, was the global giant, but we also had Mitel, Newbridge, and BlackBerry, which is quite familiar, at least when I was in India, to the Indian population. Unfortunately, our telecoms industry is not what it used to be. BlackBerry is still with us today. And it's more from a hardware company into really a security software company, and that's probably been to its advantage. And one of the elements and why we've evolved this way, why things have started to change, and I can talk about the change because I went back to San Francisco in 2008, 2009, 2010 as our consul general in California and responsible for Silicon Valley. And what we were doing is we organized a technology ecosystem, which would bring very strong startups into the Valley to see whether or not that they would be successful. So in some ways, it's very similar to what Ajay and Mitali and others are doing here with you, is seeing whether or not this is a market, Canada's a market that you might want to approach and participate in. And what we found, and the difference I saw from the 80s to 2008, 2009, was a completely different change in attitude with Canadian companies coming in and the makeup of those companies. And a lot of the success that we saw as these companies came into the Valley, there's an ecosystem, they come in, they present, they locate, they work, they compete in that area. A lot of it's based on the fact that Canada is a multicultural country, and a lot of those companies in the 2008, 2009 year that were coming into the Valley, compared to the mid 80s, were companies led by people from the diasporas. And we have many diasporas in Canada, but certainly the Indo-Canadian diaspora is large and strong, as High Commissioner Bisaria has said, but we also have Chinese Canadians and many others that have a different attitude towards risk, and also to the credit of the Canadian banking system and the venture capital system, that has, their attitude towards risk has changed dramatically as well. So again, that ecosystem began to evolve 10 years ago, and it takes about 20 years to create a really vibrant ecosystem. But as we stand today, Canada is really seen as one of the global leaders in the startup ecosystem in the startup world. But we do have our challenges still today. And one of the challenges is how do we are very good at creating technology companies in the sense of good technology coming out of the Canadian university system. Our challenge has always been to scale. But we have to think about how the support systems have been in place. And the Canadian government, I know this quite well because I at one point was responsible for our science and technology programs at international trade when I was in Ottawa. The government itself has historically avoided having an industrial strategy that picks one sector over another in the economy. And they prefer to let the market dictate. And historically, our technology support funding has been indirect through tax credit programs, supports through the IRAP program, and government funding through the NSERC program. So it's not like the United States, which has had a history of 80% direct funding through DARPA and other direct subsidy programs that the US government has put in place. This isn't, it's just two different systems, two different ways of approaching it, but it has not historically been directed at supporting companies in their activities. It's been directed to support universities. And that has turned out quite well, because now that we have these incubators and accelerators and the ability to create these startups, they're usually coming out of the university's ecosystem. And the government now has really understood the importance of being able to support these companies as they come out of that ecosystem. And that's what you see today in the environment and the activities that are going on in the country. So when you have this role of the universities playing the outsized roles of universities in the startup ecosystem, the establishment of incubators and accelerators, the attraction of highly qualified professionals from around the world, in particular Asia, and then of course international students, and many of them want to stay and participate in this ecosystem. So this is really where we are in terms of our development and evolution. And so what the current government has done, they've recognized the need to focus on areas of key sectoral strengths, and they have developed an innovation supercluster strategy. This was mentioned by the High Commissioner, and I think it's worthwhile spending a few minutes talking about this. So Canada has 5 superclusters: the digital supercluster, the protein industry supercluster, the next generation supercluster, which is basically focused on advanced manufacturing, Scale AI, which is an AI supercluster focused on logistics, and then the Ocean supercluster, which is on the east coast of Canada. And these superclusters, this supercluster strategy was announced in 2018, and over $950 million was put into this program over a 5-year period to incent large-scale collaboration among industry leaders, SMEs, post-secondary institutions, and the purpose is to develop and scale high-potential technologies in Canada. The $950 million is being matched dollar for dollar by the private sector in these 5 superclusters. And I can talk a little bit about this because I'm a board director of the digital supercluster, which is based here in Vancouver. So the purpose of the funding is to really challenge Canadian businesses of all sizes to collaborate with other innovation actors, including post-secondary and research institutions, and it's to propose bold and ambitious strategies that would transform regional innovation ecosystems and develop job-creating superclusters of innovation, similar to what you see in Silicon Valley. So again, you have to understanding that Canada is a very big country geographically, and it's quite regional in nature. So if you take a look at Vancouver as an example, British Columbia, Washington State, Oregon, California, it's what is being called the Cascadia corridor. So if you take a look at Vancouver, if you take a look at types of high technology jobs that have come into Vancouver, in the past, and again, some connections to India, we have it was known as Hollywood North, and we have a very vibrant film industry, television productions you would see here. But also because of our immigration strategies that we have, as well as the proximity to Washington State, you now see in Vancouver, Amazon with a 3,000 seat facility here, all doing technology work. This is not about warehousing and logistics. You have Microsoft with 1,500 people doing virtual reality. So you're seeing this movement of technology companies to Vancouver for a couple of reasons. One, it's the same time zone on the West Coast, which is beneficial. But more importantly, you're taking a look at a location that's not only producing great students itself, but it's also very attractive, as the High Commissioner mentioned. There's a very large Indo-Canadian community here in Surrey, which is in the lower mainland. And so when people come to Canada from a place like India, there's a great support network that's here. And then it's easy to move back and forth across the border. Of course, once COVID is and we're vaccinated and things get back to normal, it's easy to move back and forth across the border. And so the same is true if you look at Toronto, which is in central Canada and have close proximity to US markets, New York and Boston and places in the central, and not so much, but on the eastern seaboard of the United States, same time zone and the ability to work there. And again, a great university network and ecosystem. And quite frankly, a lot of what was happening in the digital incubation and acceleration space began in Toronto and has moved out across the country. So this is really an indication of what we have been able to do over the last 10 years, and it's positioned us quite well. But I still say our fundamental challenge is how do we grow our companies to be global leaders? Now, you take a look at Shopify. The High Commissioner is based in Ottawa and would know the company. It's an Ottawa-based company. Shopify is becoming a global giant, perhaps one day to compete with Amazon at the same level, but not too far behind in many ways, and it's become quite well known. But that's just one example of other areas where I see tremendous potential for Canada to become a global leader in various technology spaces. Ones that are important to India, from that perspective, and where I think there's tremendous potential for collaboration, is in healthcare, climate change, and of course agriculture. And I spent, roughly, we did one workshop over 3 weeks on precision agriculture or regenerative agriculture to basically take what we're doing in the digital space in Canada around agriculture and collaborating with India and the Indian AI community. And our partners in that process were IIT Madras. And this is an example of the potential for creating products and services that have a global reach. And we can't do it on our own in Canada. We're not big enough. So having access to data, access to talent will be very, very important for this process. And that's why India, from my perspective, is a wonderful partner. And I push quite hard for us to build those linkages in that space. So what do we see today? Canada is becoming recognized globally for a startup ecosystem, which it includes 3 key factors: access to highly qualified talent through the publicly funded university network, and progressive skilled worker immigration programs. And I'll give you a quick example. For a skilled worker coming into Canada to work at a company, it's 10 working days from the application submission to the decision. So that's an example of how quickly we can move today. Access to smart capital. And we are growing very successful seed and venture capital funding. And what I think is the most important in many ways, and something I've seen, this is the big difference. We now have a strong ambition to be a technology giant. So the final and important point, and there'll be other people talking about this, and you certainly saw it in the videos, we have wonderful quality of life in Canada. And Canadian values of inclusion and diversity are fundamental to our fabric here in Canada. And this has led to many talented university graduates and technology companies to remain in Canada instead of the past tradition, which was to relocate to California and other technology hubs in the United States. So I'll leave it there, and thank you very much, Ajay and Mitali, for this opportunity to say a few words to your cohort.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Really appreciate it. And it was very interesting to listen to you about the superclusters. So thank you for touching upon that, because I think that's going to be a very interesting topic that we would be taking up in the next few weeks to come. So thank you. I'd now like to invite on stage Dr. Chitra Anand, who's a managing partner at Mavericks Private Equity. Dr. Chitra is an acclaimed keynote speaker, author, technology executive, and advisor who spent several years with leading corporations, including Microsoft Canada, TELUS, OpenText. Dr. Chitra is also a renowned bridge builder between Canada and India. Dr. Chitra today would be talking about Canada's tech entrepreneurship and venture ecosystem. Over to you, Dr. Chitra, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today, and thank you for that very gracious introduction, Mitali. I'm just going to share my screen, if I may. I've just got a few slides that I would love to share with you. Okay, is that viewable to everybody? Mitali, are we good?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Yes, so just a quick background on myself. Yes, I have spent my career in the technology space, mostly I've been honored to work with some of the top, Canada's top companies, as well as North America. I've spent some time at Microsoft, about 5 years at Microsoft. I spent 10 years at TELUS, which is one of Canada's largest integrated communications provider, a company in Waterloo called OpenText, which is a software company out in the Waterloo Tech Triangle. I've just most recently completed my PhD on innovation, which I'm going to speak about. I've just authored a book called The Greenhouse Approach, and it's really about cultivating innovation. And I will be joining John Ruffalo with his new equity fund that he will be launching. So thank you so much. And I'm going to take some time on sort of why Canada, everybody has eyes on Canada, and why Canada is sort of viewed as the next Silicon Valley. So before we get into that, I think it's really important to really understand the innovation process. These are a few of some macro trends that are happening in the world. And in order for any startup or any company to really map sort of what it is that they're trying to do, it's really important to look at a worldview. And some of the things that are happening from an overall macro perspective as it relates to technology include this rich data-driven economy that we're in. And what I mean by that is that we've never had so much access to information out there. And the opportunity is really to monetize and create data packets that create insights for organizations. And I'm going to share with you some of these companies that are doing that. So while people say that, data is the new value currency, it's only of real value when you're able to utilize that in a really meaningful way. Another big macro trend, as we know, with this global pandemic is remote work. So we now have, a increased cohort of people working remotely. What are the implications of that? And how do we take that and turn that into something that's meaningful from an overall work perspective? And how does that create sort of a new class of organizations and companies? We see this whole concept of hyper-personalization. Once upon a time, it was business to the mass population, but really now, because of technology and because of these new technologies that have hit the market, people are expecting sort of this hyper focus on their needs, their desires, understanding their behaviors, using technology in a way to predict their predictability in terms of their buying and taste, etc. So this whole need of hyper personalization is creating a new class of businesses that I'm going to talk about in a moment. Artificial intelligence. I mean, artificial intelligence is part of this fourth industrial revolution. You know, AI is going to be creating this new class of companies as well. While people are, you know, looking at this whole sense of automation, what does that actually mean? And how can AI be used in an interesting way to help build this new class of organizations? And because of AI, it's going to create new skills and competencies from a human perspective that we may not even realize what those are now. So there's going to be this evolution of skills that we're going to require as we start to look at these businesses. So the real task here is to be able to map all of these sort of world views into industries, sectors, and roles that live inside organizations. And so that's really around the innovation process. And so what I challenge you to do, and when you think about creating your companies, is I've always believed that, you know, regardless of whatever we're in terms of industries and roles, we are in the business of solving problems. And so I would encourage you to really view what it is that you're trying to do from a problem-solving mindset. And that's the mapping exercise that I would encourage you to do from an overall innovation perspective is, you know, what is the problem that you're trying to solve for whatever industry that you're operating in? And in order to do that, you must understand the problem. So many times I've worked with tech startups and some of the CEOs, and they're addressing symptoms of a problem and not necessarily the problem. But when you can take some of these macro trends and map them to the actual problem, that's where the magic happens. And that's the lens that I would encourage you to think about when you're building your companies. So let's just take a few steps back and look at what's happening. I know Stuart talked a little bit about that, but Canada is the home of many amazing tech startups that are scaling, that are growing, that are different phases in terms of where they are. These are simply a few. And what's interesting about all of these is that they've actually taken some of those insights from the worldview and mapped it to a problem. And we can take a few looks at some of them. So Renault Run is a tech startup in Canada, and they've solved the problem of working with general contractors when you're doing home renovations, and they're actually providing a service where they're actually doing the grunt work around picking up materials and supplies while the contractors are working at your home. And what that does is it really maximizes time and resources as you're focusing on your home renovation. And so this is particularly taken off because of the pandemic right now, is that people can't travel, and their investments are now being focused onto their homes. So there's a shift in how people are spending their money. If you look at Kira is one of Canada's top AI companies. Now, I spent some time working with their CEO and their chief product officer, and Kira is an interesting story because they are founded by lawyers. What Kira has done is looked at using AI to take out the actual time and energy that's spent on contracts from a due diligence perspective for lawyers. So they saw an opportunity. They thought that AI can solve that problem through automation, and really going through contracts was taking a lot of time and energy. And what they've done is they've created an algorithm to help reduce the time spent. And now they've taken that algorithm and they've created an entire business around that. Now they're taking that algorithm and they're making it ubiquitous across industries. So any organization that requires this large due diligence that's required for contracts, this algorithm can now synthesize contracts and synthesize the data in an interesting and more condensed way that saves time and resources. You know, so it started off from a lawyer's perspective, looking at sort of the problem there, and now they've been able to apply that across industries. So again, starting from a place of problem solving, looking at how they can scale that potential algorithm and apply it to different industries. Touch Bistro is another great example. Touch Bistro is a scheduling system for restaurants, and we could go to restaurants, but it's really around putting the power back into the hands of the consumer with this hyper level of personalization. Well, Simple is another great example, and it's being pegged as the next tech unicorn in Canada. And again, it's that level of hyper personalization around banking, about wealth management, and it's putting the power back into the hands of the consumer. So what's interesting around these portfolios of companies is they're looking at all of these world views of what's happening from an overall technology perspective, and they're tying it back into problems that they can solve and scale through technology. So what I want to touch on is, in order for these organizations to really be successful, it really comes down to talent and IP, because it is my belief, and I'm sure it's many people's beliefs, that talent is the new value currency. So what do we mean by that is that any great company, whether you have a great product or service, the heart and soul of your organization is really around talent. And how do you attract talent? How do you build talent? How do you evolve talent? And talent creates IP. IP is the value that your organization really holds value around. So it's really, this is the actual fundamental truth in terms of how you're building your organization. So from a Canadian perspective, if we view it from that lens, you know, why is Canada such a great opportunity and place to attract talent, to build companies? And Stuart mentioned it earlier. The first point is really around, we've got world-class universities. So from Waterloo, we've got, you know, one of the top math programs, engineering programs. You see amazing things happening out of that university. You've got University of Toronto, again, one of the top ranked universities within North America. And that's really a real, you see people staying now in Canada as a result, and great talent is coming out of these universities. We've got a diverse workforce. Canada is known to be this cultural melting pot. We have a diverse workforce because of immigration policies, and we do also know that diverse workforce really means different points of view. And when you have different points of view, that's when innovation really happens. And Canada certainly is a place where you see many different cultural groups working together, which really does strengthen the overall workforce. Thirdly, why do people, you know, are coming to Canada? We've got excellent healthcare, you know, compared to the US, and looking at what's happening there in terms of private versus social. Canada is known as having a great access to healthcare, economic stability. You know, recently over the last year or so, or 3 or 4 years or so, it became less and less attractive to go to the States because of economic unrest, as well as political unrest. And so people are looking at Canada from an overall workplace, from an overall quality of life perspective, for all of these reasons, and they're flocking more towards Canada for that. And overall, if you look at the housing market, if you compare in terms of Silicon Valley, it's much more affordable, although, you know, depending on where you are within the overall city and within the area, Canada is certainly much more attractive and appealing from an overall housing market. And all of these together really make Canada a great place to have a quality of life as a result of all of these things coming together. So in terms of the ecosystem, which I'd like to spend some time going over, you know, when you talk about an ecosystem, and when you talk about the startup scene and innovators, and how does all of this come together, it's really about this interdisciplinary approach of how startups get funding, the support structure from around this entire ecosystem, and how do they actually work together. And so if you look at some of the universities, what's quite interesting, at the University of Waterloo, at U of T, at Laurier and Queen's, they actually have their own incubators and accelerators that are sitting within themselves. And what they've realized is that because Canada's economy is made up of small, medium businesses, they've recognized that a lot of these students that are coming out of those programs want to create their own businesses. So they've created their own infrastructure of entrepreneurship and accelerators and sort of incubators on taking your ideation from idea to execution, on how do you support this new talent of people that are coming out of the university. So that's an increasing pillar that's occurring. Organizations such as the BDC, the Ryerson, DMZ, and Mars. So while these organizations support the VC system, they're also providing different resources. So they are part incubators and accelerators, but it's also a place to obtain support in terms of mentorship, etc. So you see a lot of these organizations creating their own mobile workplaces. They have access to mentorship. They have accesses to angel investors, etc. So working all together, and they're working lockstep with the universities on this interchangeability of resources and what's available to VCs in this space. Corporates are now becoming a big part of investing. I spent some time at Microsoft. I was actually there when we opened the Center for Innovation in BC, and a lot of it is really an opportunity to create more entrepreneurship within that corridor, but also to attract talent. You're seeing Amazon set up shop there. Every single major tech company has realized that Canada is a hotbed of talent, and they have set up offices in the downtown cores and their surrounding areas because they've realized that the IP, it's an opportunity for them to create IP. So not only are they looking at Canada for talent, they're also creating links to other accelerators. So for example, Microsoft is creating a program with Invest Ottawa where they're providing a platform and their tools for whatever entrepreneurs need a platform and tools in order to build their business. So it's partly capital, but it's also partly tools. So they've realized that, as much as entrepreneurs, when they're building their companies, need capital, they also need the platforms and tools to set up their shops, and that creates a level of stickiness. You're starting to see banks and telcos create their own sort of arms around venture capitalism. So TELUS now has an entire business arm that's dedicated to venture. They're actually funding startups. One of them is League that I talked about earlier, where they're actually providing capital to fund that. RBC has an entire system around another area where they're creating a platform to provide funding for the startup community. So I think what's really important here is that corporations are now starting to get involved in the VC process. They've realized that Canada can be a place where we can build global organizations, and they want to participate in funding that growth and fueling that growth. And so however they can achieve that, they're now participating in the process. And so that's quite interesting. The government, I think Stuart talked about it earlier, is that there's grants, there's federal tax incentives, and there's programs, and the government, from an overall culture perspective, from a country perspective, has realized that Canada certainly is a place where SMBs are being born. They've also realized that it can be a place where you can start to scale and grow businesses from an overall, we can build these global multinationals. Shopify is well on its way. Lightspeed's well on its way. So there's great opportunities in order to do that. In terms of incubators and accelerators, we've got, the list goes on. And these all vary from supporting entrepreneurship and the startup community from ideation to execution at different various levels on where you are in your process, whether it's funding, whether it's developing the business plan, whether it's refining your product, whether it's looking at your organizational develop, whether it's scaling, whether it's access to mentorship, whether it's access to capital. So all of these incubators and accelerators are coming together to really, really strengthen the ecosystem. We have a another fantastic arm of conferences. Canada is now a destination for some of the world's top tech conferences, from Collision to Web Summit to Elevate to Silicon Valley North to the FinTech Summit to CIX Summit. So all of these conferences are now a hub of, coming together on different tracks in terms of, a worldview on what's happening from an overall thematic perspective. They have attracted some of the world's top speakers, and they're creating little incubation and accelerator camps within the conferences, so that entrepreneurs can now meet. They can exchange ideas, they can be connected, they have a platform to ask questions, and it's a real sense of community as it's building the ecosystem. So those are the main components around sort of what's happening from an overall ecosystem perspective, and sort of why Canada is this hub of innovation. And I'd be happy to take some questions if we have the time to do so.
Gaurav, can we check if there's some questions?
Sure. If you have any questions, please raise your hand and I can take you to on stage, and you can ask your question, or you can drop in your question in chat box as well. I guess we don't have any questions here.
Okay, I think maybe then we can move on.
Ajay, there's one question.
Oh, yes. Okay.
If you check in the participants box, Mani Chandokar.
You want me to read it? So the question is, are universities partnering with startups for research and development? I mean, it's a great question. I think that the approach that the universities are taking, Amit, is that they're actually creating a platform for the students within. So, if you're a student at University of Waterloo, etc., I believe that a lot of the resources that they're dedicating is to the existing students that attend those particular universities. I do also believe that they've opened up opportunities at startups. They've created their own sort of workshops, opportunities, courses, if you will, to help support the startups. But the main things that they're doing currently is that they've recognized that a lot of the students that are attending their particular universities or schools want to go in that route. And the question that they're trying to answer is, how do we best support them without risking sort of losing talent, if you will. So they've recognized that need. So primarily it's for the students that are attending. However, they're also creating other cohorts of content where they can help support the other startup community at large.
Great.
So there's another question. Should I take that, Mitali?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Okay. A question I have asked before is, if a startup wants to evaluate Canada versus US for setting up a North American business, what items would tilt the scale in favor of Canada? I think I talked about that earlier in terms of what makes Canada a great place to be. Our diverse workforce, the fact that, healthcare, political and economic stability, in terms of overall quality of life. I would say from an overall living perspective. Now, in terms of access to capital, the slide that I showed you in terms of the ecosystem, I would argue that we have a very, very strong ecosystem. And what's interesting about the concept of ecosystem is that it's not operating independent of each other. So all of the things that I showed you are supporting each other. So if you are at an accelerator or at a incubator, there's direct linkage to VCs, investors, capital. So when you join one of those particular areas, wherever you are in the process, you will have direct sort of access to any of those opportunities. So what we do very well is that we're very linked and we're very connected. So I would argue that it would be a better place to be in Canada simply because of that reason, because it is a very strong ecosystem. That's would be my opinion on that.
Great. I think you've really said you've given some very strong points for everybody to think about. Why Canada? And thank you very much for your time this evening and this morning. Sorry for you all. We'll move on now to the next speaker. Talking of Canada-India bilateral technology relations will be incomplete without bringing in the representation from the Department of Science and Technology, which has been doing yeoman work in bilateral S&T relations. I'd now like to call upon Dr. Sanjeev K. Varshni to share his insights on India-Canada S&T cooperation.
Thank you, Mitali. Good morning to you. And I hope I can share my screen. There's some problem. Just a minute. So, let me start that I'm Sanjeev Varshne. I work for Department of Science and Technology in Government of India. And